Leverage is beautiful. Leverage is a beautiful thing. If you're not comfortable taking on debt, this might not be the business for you.
Why Baltimore? First, I think the audience would love to hear why you built it up in Baltimore. Best areas to invest in Baltimore right now.
I mean, every house was a deal. They all truly cash flowed really well. And so I wanted to buy as many of them as I could.
What was your process in scaling up to build that portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, update mechanicals as necessary, and they rewired my entire house. And in order to rewire the house, they banged holes all throughout the plaster in my house. I'm like, oh my God.
If you could put your finger on just the biggest item that hurt you, that was like, man, I would have done this differently. Was it contractors? Was it underwriting?
There were many sleepless nights. The only time I've had that kind of stress, I mean, I had a couple of panic attacks at the time. It got serious, right? My health was jeopardized because of it. I was just taking on too much risk.
Hey, investors, welcome back to another episode. I am interviewing Shaun Magner today, who is a local Baltimore investor. And we are going to talk about investing and building a rental portfolio in Baltimore, hard money lending, and teaching and coaching. I'm super excited for the interview, but the few points that we're going to go over are key actions real estate investors need to be taking to be successful today, best areas to invest in Baltimore right now, biggest pitfalls in real estate investing and how to avoid them. And we're going to learn from his journey and how he is helping the next generation of real estate investors. So welcome to the podcast, Shaun.
David, thanks for having me, buddy. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I ran across Shaun's stuff. He is putting out a decent amount of social media stuff. He's an educator. And I just felt like we were very much aligned in our character, in our values. And so that's why I'm excited really to dig into your story, especially for new investors that are looking to get into the game and that just need that extra encouragement. I think, at least from what I've seen, the way you speak to people on how your journey was awesome. So could you just take us through kind of how you got started in real estate investing, maybe that first property?
Sure thing. So how I technically first got started was house hacking before I even knew the term. I knew what house hacking was. I'd never heard it, didn't know what it was. But I was 22 years old and I had a sales job and I wanted to move out and buy my own house, but I could only afford to do so because a couple buddies promised to rent rooms from me. And so technically I got started by house hacking. My second property I bought was another house hack. It was a 2-unit. I lived on my own. I rented the upstairs unit out to a young lady and she paid 78% of my mortgage. And that's kind of how I got started. But if you're asking more specifically how I got into the business of real estate investing, that's a little different story. That, like many, and like some or like many, I responded to a radio ad that I heard offering education and coaching. And I mean, at this point, man, I'd never heard of a RIA, didn't know what hard money was. I didn't know any of the jargon, right? But I knew from watching all those shows like we all watched, Flip This House and all those other shows on, I don't know, was it A&E or something, that I had an interest in that. And I had a background in the building trades. So it made sense to me. So I just responded to an ad and I hired a coaching company to kind of help me to connect the dots.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Were your first two house hacks, were those in Baltimore?
No, actually one was in Baltimore. The second one was in Baltimore when I moved to the area in 2013. The first one I bought in 2006 back in the town that I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Awesome. And what town was that?
It's called Lidditz. It's just a small town in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Nice.
About 65, 70 miles north of Baltimore.
Nice. Yeah. Lancaster has been on fire recently. I think I analyzed their market and I was like, holy smokes, these properties have appreciated. And then you said you had a background in construction. I mean, what was that background that helped
Good question.
you? Didn't help you?
No, dude, it helped me tremendously. So my folks, kind of take it back a little bit further. My folks split when I was 15, and I don't want to bore people with my entire life's journey here, but there's a point to it. When I was 15, my folks split. So dad was on his own to do what he could to keep the lights on, the roof over our head. Didn't really coach me or steer me in the direction of college. And I was also not a very studious kid, admittedly. And so I got out of high school. My friends started going off to college, and I thought, well, what the heck am I going to do? And so I'd always heard that there was some money to be made in the building trades. There was honor in the trades. My family up in New England comes from a background in construction. So I thought, well, let's just do that. So I started pushing some brooms and wheelbarrows around a job site, just doing some construction labor. Decided I liked the trade, wanted to get a formal education in the trade. And I attended a local trade school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Shout out to Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology. So I attended this school and got an Associate's of Applied Science with a major in carpentry, and I got a job working for a local high-end remodeler and home builder. And I did that for a few years. And then one of the guys that I got to know that would come to our job sites often was a window and door salesperson. We got to know him. He had an opening in his company. He put my name in for he, I guess, referred me, if you will, for an interview. And I took a bet on myself and I decided to go for it. And so then I got into sales of building materials. So, and then I parlayed that into a different management role and a leadership role at different building material manufacturers and supply houses. And so my entire career has been in the residential real estate space in some capacity.
And was that intentional, just out of curiosity?
No, it wasn't.
Or it was just like, you're just kind of like, oh man, this is a good opportunity. And you just kind of rolled into the next, but it wasn't like getting in the construction trade. And when you say construction trade, you mean you were like GCing the project, or were you actually doing a trade like masonry?
So I was a carpenter. So we did a lot of trim carpentry on these nice big homes. So I just worked as a trim carpenter, and we did some framing and it was all just residential construction. So, but yeah, I was swinging hammers, man. I was not a foreman. When we were in my college, we each year, the second year class would build a duplex house, and I was a foreman there. But no, I was just a carpenter, man, just swinging hammers.
Gotcha. And it just seemed like it was the next step when the opportunity came along.
Yeah, that's it. I've always been a pretty curious person. And so I would be on these big homes. As I mentioned, I was working for a nice high-end remodeler and home builder. And so we're working on these beautiful properties. And I would always I was always so curious, what does this owner do for a living?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, man, every single time, unless they were like a doctor or a lawyer, they owned something, right? They owned a business of some sort. They were all entrepreneurial. And I always realized that I was building somebody else's dream by trading my time for money, right? But I didn't really connect the dots. I guess if I look back on it, I had some sort of an entrepreneurial spirit from a young age, but I don't think that I was tapping into that at the time. I think I was just pursuing my curiosity and always wanting to grow. And I also do subscribe to and I probably shouldn't because it's probably toxic to some degree, that if you're not climbing, you're sliding, right? Have you ever heard that? And so each year I try to do better than the year before. And so I'm always looking and had always been looking for the next opportunity. And so at the time, swinging hammers for a living, I'll tell you this. I was sitting on a job site and it was hot midsummer. We were framing a house. And I remember this old guy, Ray, went down. We were on break. He got down on his lunchbox to eat his food. He's dripping hot sweat. He's got knee pads on. This guy's wearing knee pads any time of year, right? It could be, we're hanging siding in the summer and he's just got knee pads on. He always had these knee pads on. Anyway, I knew I was not going to be that, right? At 70 years old, I couldn't be sitting on a job site, a dirty, dusty job site. And I started looking for more and what's next for me. And this person offered me an opportunity to interview at his company. But I'll tell you this, prior to that, I was introduced to a book, which a lot of your readers or a lot of your audience is probably familiar with, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki.
Yep.
And I learned the difference between assets and liabilities. And I learned what the cash flow quadrant was and how to navigate from one cell to the next. And I basically had a bit of a paradigm shift in that moment by reading that book. There's been a couple books that have hit me right between the eyes over the course of my career. And that one was kind of the jump, which is the jump for a lot of real estate entrepreneurs.
Yeah. A few things that I want to pull out there just real quick. I mean, it definitely sounds like you are into self-growth or self-learning. And you're curious, which I am super curious about everything, almost to a fault where some people take offense to it. But just because I want to know, even with my wife, I'm like, I just got to know, honey. I just got to know. It is no offense. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just curious. And I think that's such an awesome characteristic that you can build in if you don't have this, and how you can utilize this skill. It sounds like, especially for you, just if you're in the trade and you're working on a house, how much does this sell for? What are they running it? I mean, just trying to run the numbers. You don't even have to be the owner of the property, but trying to understand what other people are doing. And if that's something that might interest you, maybe it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with being a tradesman. I'm a huge proponent of it. It's like, hey, if you don't know what you're doing in life, you can join the service or join a trade. I think those are like awesome paths. But
dude, to build on what you just said there, I agree with you. I support the trades tremendously. So, and actually, I've had the good fortune of going back to that trade school, starting an endowed scholarship in my family name. So we're paying for kids to get educations there, to get educated in the building trades. specifically to the building trades. And then also, as this recording, August 2024, I should be voted onto a foundation board at that school. So I'll be on the board there soon too. So I'm with you, man. I pour back into the trades. I think it's the building trades have done wonders for me and my family. And there's such honor there. And let's be real, AI is not going to replace the guy that has to go out and snake the toilet, right? So
Right.
if you're willing to put in an honest day's work, there's an honest day's pay there for you.
No, I appreciate that. And thank you for doing that for the trades. That's awesome. Let's talk about, you built your portfolio up to, was it like 40 units, somewhere around there?
A little over that. Yep.
Okay. And that was mostly in and around Baltimore?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I want to ask you, why Baltimore first? I think the audience would love to hear why you built it up in Baltimore.
Sure. So why Baltimore? First, well, the obvious question is because I lived there, right? I was living there. I currently live just south of Annapolis, closer to or south of Baltimore, closer to Annapolis. But I lived there. It was easy. It was in my own backyard. I was also working a job at the time that I started investing. And so it made sense for me, and it was a sales and sales leadership job. So I was out and about quite often in my own market. And so it just made sense to stay local here. Also, my goals at the time were to buy enough cash flowing properties to replace my income eventually. And I'm fortunate that I live in Baltimore, which across the country is big markets and little mid-sized markets go. It's one of the stronger cash flowers out there. You well know that. You do a lot of research around the country.
Yep.
Cash flows very well in Baltimore. It's not the barrier of entry is also pretty low. There's a lot of inventory here. It's an old East Coast industrial city. So there's a lot of aging inventory, and there's a lot of it. Baltimore's not a big city. It's about 86 square miles. It's a small city, but there are a lot of houses, and every single day a new house falls into disrepair that needs some improvement. So there's no shortage of opportunity here. And when I say the barrier of entry is pretty low, I don't know the numbers. I'm not a realtor. They would be able to pump out those statistics, but you can buy homes pretty affordably in Baltimore. So that's my why. That's why Baltimore really.
Price point, cash flow, and location to where you live. And is that what you for advice to a newer investor that's trying to get in the game? I mean, would you say look for those three things?
Yeah, the three things, yes or no. I mean, it depends on who's listening, right? If somebody lives in a rural part of the country, they might need to consider remote investing, right? Because of the opposite of what I just said. There may not be inventory in their backyard. So for that reason, they may need that. It might not be a good fit for that individual. But if you live close enough to a metro or a city with any sort of population, with some growth and such, I would say yes. I also think that there's an acronym ACE, Appreciation, Cash Flow, Equity, ACE. I always bought for cash flow. Why? Because my priority at the time was, again, to replace my job, to pursue the entrepreneurial track full time. If I was just buying for appreciation, which, if you ask me, I mean, I'll tell you, I think it's more of a speculator's gamble than it is an investment strategy, but that's just me. If you do that, well, you're not going to replace your job because there's you can't buy a bag of chips with equity, right? So for those reasons, yeah, that worked for me. But if somebody is looking to build a portfolio of cash flowing assets, I would tell them, yeah, certainly. I mean, it worked for me, right? But I think that depending on where they're located geographically, they may have to look outside of their market.
I always think that cash flow is the most conservative way to go, but I also think you can go too heavy into cash flow and not think about location appreciation. It's kind of like a pendulum. Sometimes you're going to swing if you swing over to the cash flow, which is probably what I did. And I was just like only thinking about cash flow. Sometimes that can burn you a little bit and you don't realize, oh man, these are rougher areas that I'm dealing with. Right. And then you miss out on these crazy appreciations. So I'm usually in the middle, but I think that's sage advice that you're giving people.
No, and I agree with your thinking, man. You make a lot of sense in that. I agree with you. I think that there have been, if you don't have an exit down in a few years, if you don't have a plan to exit buying just cash flow properties, you're going to be stuck with a management, job for a long time inside of your own business.
And there's usually a reason that a property can cash flow $800, and you're like, oh man, this is, I mean, on paper, some properties in Baltimore look like they are the best investment in the entire world. I'm like,
yeah.
And people will bring them to me. I'm like, ooh, I would probably not invest in that area. Even though it's an $800 cash flow, you're probably only going to make that cash flow 2 months out of the 12 months of the year because you're either there's crime on the block. People don't want to rent from you. Somebody's going to break into your house. I mean, so there's so many disadvantages of certain areas of any major city that has high crime. I do want to know, how did you scale? What was your process in scaling up to build that portfolio? And did it change?
Yeah, it changed. It changed slightly, but leverage. One of the beautiful things about real estate is, aside from, there's a lot, right? Tax depreciation, lots of tax drag, incentives, but leverage is beautiful. Leverage is a beautiful thing. If you're not comfortable taking on debt, this might not be the business for you. But I always understood that my cash flow would cover my debt, and so I was ready to rock and roll. So what did I do, and how did I scale? I used OPM. That's it. Other people's money. When I got started, I tapped into some of my own retirement reserves and went all in on myself. Cashed out 401ks and IRAs and mutual funds, and I used that as some of my own skin in the game for the first few deals. But that skin in the game was only a minority skin in the game because I used a hard money lender. For those who aren't familiar, hard money lenders are private lenders that lend to real estate investors for the acquisition and or renovation of investment real estate specifically. So think about a structured private lender or a loose bank, right? Somewhere in between there, right? And so a hard money lender took a bet on me as a newbie. And I also had a W-2 at the time. So I had some security, some safety. I looked like a safe bet to them. So they required me to have some cash in, but I used the lender. And then eventually I replaced my capital because my capital ran out and I wanted to keep doing deals. So I had to get creative. And I went to my lender. And at this point, we'd done a few dozen deals together. And I said, hey, I still have good deal flow, but I've run out of my own capital. Would you be willing to take on more risk for a bigger return? Fund all of my deals, and I'll give you a little, and I'll happily pay a little more interest or points or fees. You can make a little more money on each loan. And he agreed to. There's sometimes you bet on the jockey and sometimes you bet on the horse, and sometimes you bet on them both. But this guy was willing to take a bet on the jockey. And so then, his reserves were tapped, right? So, his capacity kind of ran thin. And so I started building a network of lenders and then raising private capital. So raising capital from friends and family that would allow me to fill the gap of what my hard money lender required of me. And that is how you can infinitely scale if you are willing to put in the effort.
Gotcha. And so that first one, just to go back and just to hit it really quick, so I'm understanding it correctly. Your first one, you pulled some of your retirement account.
Yep.
Did you get penalized on pulling it?
No, because I think
there's some loopholes.
I didn't at all. The reason I didn't is because I pulled from retirement accounts 401ks that I had left behind at previous employers, and I could roll that into an IRA without any penalty. And at the time that who I was working for at the time, I didn't start a 401k there or any retirement. I didn't contribute to any retirement plan there because I was already investing in my real estate business, right? And so I'd have to go back and look at those numbers.
Was that like a 20% down? Or was that like a 10% down? Do you remember?
No, it's interesting. So what I was buying, I learned from a mentor who owned a couple hundred houses here in Baltimore City, and where he's buying, and we've all heard the saying, you surround yourself, you're a product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so I started buying where he's buying, not right where he's buying, but in parts of the city that my money could go pretty far in. And so this lender said, look, he was brand new. This guy had just sold his business. He came into a big chunk of money and he wanted to start lending. So my mentor introduced us and I was his first loan. And all he said was, hey, I want you to have at least 15 grand in each deal. That's fine by me. I had a little over $100,000 that I had to work with. That told me I could do a couple deals at a time. But there was no set 5, 10, 15, 20% down or anything like that. Because if you're talking down payment on an acquisition, I was buying them for 30, 40 grand back then. 15,000 is a significant chunk down on an acquisition that low.
Times has changed, but yes, I do remember, $25,000 properties in okay neighborhoods. You're like, whoa, that's not happening anytime soon.
No, I wish you bought them all.
So 15, so you're required to put 15K down. It sounds like you were a little bit creative, and it was a relationship that you built with the hard money lender that really allowed you to kind of negotiate a little bit of terms.
That's right. And this is very much a relationship-based business, right? I mean, the product happens to be real estate or loans or debt or whatever it is, but it's about relationships. This is a relationship and networking business, and so those relationships have benefited me tremendously. And anyone listening, I would encourage you to focus on building out quality relationships with people that are doing what you want to do.
What's your biggest tip there on I'm an extrovert. So I love talking to people. It's super easy to me to build relationships because I
Yeah.
really enjoy it. It's a passion of mine.
Yeah.
But for somebody that isn't maybe like me, that would love to follow that advice, I mean, where would you lead them to?
That's a really good question. And I actually just recently touched on this in a live stream I did in my own Facebook group. But when you attend these big networking events, big rooms of people, 100 people, 200, 300 people, it can be super intimidating to just walk across the room, identify somebody, and just produce a conversation out of thin air in hopes that you can uncover some synergy, right? It can be. And so
Yeah.
what I would say to that person that's like me, more introverted. I was in sales and sales leadership for a long time. A lot of friends that I have would probably laugh when I tell them that I'm an introvert, but 100% of the time I want to be at home on my couch in my own space, right? I'm that way.
100%.
I can be an extroverted introvert, but it takes a lot out of me. And so what I would say to take some of that overwhelm away, to make it a little more digestible and manageable, I would say, find out what's most important to your business today. What's one team member that you could add today that would actually move the needle, that would move the boulder up the hill a little bit for you? If you're brand new, you attend a networking event, you might want to find a realtor or a wholesaler, right? Someone that can give you leads today, that can start producing leads for you to underwrite. Well, identify that one person, introduce yourself, exchange information, and maybe just contact them later if you're seriously introverted. But have a conversation and see if you can find some synergies and your values align, and they're willing to talk with you. And that can really make the overwhelm of a big room and the intimidation of it dissipate.
I love that advice of just take one small step. I mean, that's advice in all aspects of life, not just relationship building. Just find that one small thing.
Yeah.
Especially in real estate investing, I feel like we get massively overwhelmed, and so that pulls that paralysis analysis out. And if you can just take that one small step, just like you said, I mean, I love that. It's such good advice for newer investors. Whether it's just if you need leads and you don't have any properties, then that's probably a realtor or a wholesaler. And just like, all I need to get here, all I'm looking to do is come out with one contact. Don't think you need to go and build your entire team. It's going to take time. I think on that live stream, you also talk about following up, what you just said, which is also super important because people will forget you, especially when they're meeting 50 people. Just say, hey, it was really nice meeting you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, yada, yada, yada. That goes a long way. And it's just a kind thing to do. Best areas to invest in Baltimore right now?
In my opinion, Eastern Baltimore County is hot. That's Dundalk, Essex, Middle River. If you're looking at a map, they appraise high, they cash flow well, they rent quickly. You're in the county, not the city, so your taxes are lower, your crime is better, your schools are better. There's some reason there. If you want some peak appreciation, get into some of the neighborhoods that surround the water in the city. In my opinion, the Cantons, Fells Point, Federal Hills, but really the counties. I mean, you can find deals everywhere, really. But cash flow wise, I like East Baltimore. I find there's a few reasons I like it, but you'll learn if you start shopping the Baltimore market. They speak in a zip code language over here. I'm sure, David, you know that. It's a weird.
I know it because I always have to tell people that are from Baltimore. I am not from Baltimore, so because they're always, I don't even know what zip code's my property. I have to look my property, like, okay, that's the zip code. But it's very much zip code.
Funny. I own 12 and 1-3. I own a bunch in. Yeah, it's wild. I own in 1-8, who's the 3-1, 1-3, 2-9. It's ridiculous how they do that. Anyway, so where to buy in Baltimore, man? I think what's really hot right now is Eastern Baltimore City or Eastern Baltimore County is very hot. Towson is a good pocket. So that's kind of where a lot of my borrowers focus, where I've focused. And
any places inside the city that aren't on the water, Fed Hill and Canton. You think that Canton and Fed Hill, you see that appreciation?
Yeah, I do. I think it's an easy rental. It's an easy cash flow, or it's not a strong cash flow, but it's an easy rental, easy to manage. Young professionals that pay and take care of the properties, stay and take care, and they do appreciate it.
I worry about the Fed Hill, like Canton. I just feel like as they appreciate, the taxes just go way up, and they conversely, affect the cash flow. And so I'm always like, I mean,
we personally own one property in Canton one in Butchers Hill, and that's it. Like I said, I'm a big cash flow buyer. So everything that I own is in neighborhoods that aren't quite the same as that neighborhood. And so, but outside of the waterfront stuff for appreciation, if you're talking in the city, I mean, you can get, up in the Hamden's a hot little pocket. Hamilton still does pretty well. I see a lot of deals, a lot of opportunity in Hamilton that makes sense. Hamilton, Laurelville, Northeast Baltimore.
I agree.
You can get into Reservoir Hill and what's the name of the neighborhood up there? I'm drawing a blank, but
Druid Hill.
Some of those neighborhoods are on the cusp. They're beautiful neighborhoods, but right next door is a whole different experience. And so there's a little bit of that, bleeding over. Patterson Park in East Baltimore, Patterson Park, the north side of that park, I've watched that appreciate tremendously over the last 10 years. I do think that Orleans Street, Fayette Street are still major dividing lines. When you get north of Orleans, everything changes.
For the worst or the better?
I mean, for the worst, in my opinion.
I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I mean, I just wanted to hear it. I mean, so now I'm going to get all the people that that's what Shaun said.
I mean, Orleans Street is
I do agree, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to make sure I was understood.
Yeah, Orleans Street, Route 40 it's a dividing line, and it'll take a long time for that to really change for what's happened south of there.
But you like everything underneath Orleans Street, south of Orleans Street?
I do. I own a few over there myself. I've lived not far from there before for a long time. I like it. Highlandtown, Greektown, really nice pockets on your way out of the city on the east side. 21229, Beachfield, Yale Heights, Edmondson Village-ish, but for rentals over that way, the numbers tend to work out. They're nicer areas, nice homes.
Man, you're throwing out some fire right now. This is great.
Yeah. There's a lot of, and I could go the opposite and say the neighborhoods I would stay away from for sure. But
what neighborhoods would you say absolutely stay away from? I mean, you don't have to give out a ton, but just what?
Personally, I'll tell you again, back to the zip code thing, what pops up when I see 21223, it could be Mill Hill, Wilkins Ave stretch of kind of southwest Baltimore. I don't like it. When I see certain pockets in 1617, Winchester, Sandtown, Winchester, there's certain pockets in there that are really nice. It's not fair. I've had the conversation with another high-level operator a few years ago. It's not really fair to say zip codes, I don't like that zip code, because inside of, I think it's 16 or 17, you've got a really nice neighborhood, and then you've got really bad, really tough, high crime neighborhood, right? And so,
I think, would you agree with the term, like, you can't blanket the zip codes? In Baltimore City is very block by block. I mean, if you kind of understand that, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's tremendously so, block by block. And I've got plenty of stories to support that, but it's very much block by block. Comp from 3 blocks away might burn you, right? I mean, literally. So 21223 is a zip code that I just don't personally love. There's a lot of, from an investment standpoint, that is a lot of operators that do well over there. I lend to some of them, but when those deals come through, I look at the operator very closely.
What's some learning lessons now looking back on building that portfolio out that you could pass along to newer investors that you might change?
Great. That's a strong question, man. And the response could be super valuable if I can put it together the right way. I would say this.
Yeah.
Remind yourself regularly to run your own race. Here's what I mean by that. I was recently introduced to a book. I've mentioned paradigm shifts from books over the years. The Gap and the Gain, Dan Barton and Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. They've written a trilogy of books, and the middle one, the second one's called The Gap and the Gain. Wonderful book. But the gap is where we find ourselves regularly. I think the subtitle is something like The High Achiever's Guide to Happiness and Success. And the gap is where we spend too much time focused on where we'd rather be, right? So it's a horizon that's ever moving. I just moved to the suburbs. I've got a 2-car garage. I need a 3-car garage. I've got a 3,000 square foot house. I need a 5,000. I've got a 22-foot boat. I need a 25-foot boat. That's how we just remain unhappy. But if you can remember to look backwards and measure backwards, they call it AMB, always measure backwards. That's the gain. That's the weapon that you can use to get out of the gap. Look backwards and say, man, look what I've done from when I started to where I am. That's incredible. I am currently living what was once a dream life, right? Just realize that, accept it. So where I say run the race is this: moving too fast can result in making bad decisions. Ego can get inflated when you do a lot of deals and you're the center of attention. Ego gets inflated, you're moving even faster, and now you're making bigger, worse decisions. I say all this from a place of experience, man. I do. When I got started, I went from 0 houses to 18 doors in my first 15 months. And this is back in 2015. And I mean, now you hear of people doing dozens and dozens of deals a year. I totally get it. Things are different. But at the time, there weren't many in our circle, at least up here, that were buying a lot of houses like that. And I was doing it the wrong way. I was moving too fast. I was taking on too much leverage, and it got out in front of me. Right. And so I had to climb out of a hole that I dug for myself, a bit of a debt hole. It took me a little while to climb out of. And because I just did too many rehabs and took on too much leverage and realized, oh smokes, if you've got, I mean, think about this. I see it all the time. Some of my borrowers do a lot of deals, and I see them often. They're buying a lot of houses and they're break-even cash flows. What's going to happen when the turnover hits? What's going to happen when the prepayment or the prepayment penalty hits when you plan to refinance inside of the initial term of the loan? Those are things that people don't consider, and you can get out ahead of yourself too pretty quickly by just moving too fast. So just run your own race, because right now there's all this social media has put all of everybody's good in our face, and so it's easy to really do this whole comparison thing. And I do genuinely think the comparison is the thief of joy, though it's healthy if you can keep it in check, no doubt. But that's kind of my advice, man. And
I thought you were going to go completely a different way with that. I thought you were going to say, like, be careful of, you go into some of these rooms and you'll hear people saying, like, I have 100 units. And I'm a big proponent of, like, don't care about units. Whatever somebody says, it does not matter with the run your own race. And I feel like it's so important. You can have 3 properties and fulfill all your goals, right?
I mean, I think you and I might have talked about that before.
Yeah. I mean, you feel terrible when somebody says, I got 100 units and you got like 10. You're like, oh man, I'm doing terrible. Even though you're doing great. You could be doing better than that person with like net income. They could be doing terrible. And I feel like we're getting that comparison way too much. And I'm such a proponent of, like, don't try to do like crazy amount of doors or compare yourself to some people. That's what I thought you were going with that. But I love,
there's a lot of ways to peel that back, that run your own race thing. But you're right. The door count thing is, I mean, I'll keep it PG on your podcast here, but man, it's a measuring competition and it's nothing more. If I could make all of my goals, my financial goals by owning one property, I would gladly do one deal. That would be it. I'd be happy to own one property.
You'd be smarter and more efficient to do it that way, which I feel like so many people, it's just this like ego trip of like, I have so many doors, and I actually really try to shove it down my audience's throat that it's like, hey, don't worry about unit count. If you hear me say unit count, don't worry. If you hear Shaun say you got over 40, don't worry. It's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. We're in different seasons, and it doesn't even necessarily mean we're doing super well. It could mean you're doing really well.
That's a good point.
But I feel like there's so many facades out there.
I could be broke. I mean, so the most recent networking event I attended, there was a young guy that walked up to me and introduced himself. He recognized me from Facebook. We had a conversation. And I asked him, so what's your focus? And you're at a real estate investing meetup. What's your focus? And he says, oh, rentals. I have 112. And I'm like, God, man, what? Right away. Okay. Congratulations on all the success, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you're not making $1 on any of them. I have no idea. But you're just proud to tell me how many doors you have, which is fine. Listen, respect. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to do that. But it's like the same thing with people posting pictures of checks on social media. Like, is that check all profit? Is it just paying yourself back? Is it paying yourself back some of what you're all into this deal for? And it's just a big old check. It means nothing. It means nothing.
I think that the takeaway before we both go off on rants is that just be cautious when people say that, because it doesn't totally mean, even if they're on a podcast, even if they have their own podcast, it doesn't mean we're this, holier than thou and just absolutely crushing it. The check could mean something totally different. Most people, even that they're not trying to be nefarious, are off to their favor in their numbers. I've found this when I'd like share something and then I go back and look at it and I go, dang, I was $5,000. I told them $5,000 more, even though it wasn't. So I'll just like go back and, so just be careful when somebody says something and you're like, oh, is that really the accurate number? It often is not, but just be wary of that. I just want to hit on that last. You were vulnerable. I really appreciate you being vulnerable there and saying that you were going too fast. I think there's some good learning lessons right there. For going too fast and getting over leveraged, what did that look like for you? And how did you what would you have done differently? You just slowed down and done them more slowly instead of been like, oh man, I have these properties sitting. What did that actually look like? Were just properties sitting, waiting to be worked on, so you're just getting eaten in holding costs, or what did that actually look like?
There was a bit of that. There was a bit of mismanagement of the construction itself. I went on an international trip and left a new crew to renovate a house, and I told them minimally, exactly. I told them update mechanicals.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at you. It just
you've been there. I mean,
we all have our stories, dude.
Yeah, I mean, update mechanicals as necessary, and they rewired my entire house. And in order to rewire the house, they banged holes all throughout the plaster in my house. I'm like, oh my God. So that thing went over. I had to take on a greater leverage position from my lender. He took some mercy on me and gave me more debt than he probably should have. Yeah. Housing, at the time, man, I could make deals. I mean, every house was a deal. They all truly cash flowed really well. And so I wanted to buy as many of them as I could. And to your point initially, yes, I did have a few that were sitting on the sidelines waiting to get started. So the interest clock is ticking. I had a few where we had some construction just overages, tremendously so, some unforeseen things. When you're remodeling an old house, and you go opening up walls and things, be prepared for surprises. Build in some concessions into your construction budget because you're going to have surprises. Flips not selling for what I thought they would. So bad underwriting, that was part of it. That was really it. But, I was putting a lot of rehab money on credit cards and then using using draw money for EMD. And now I'm like, cash is like, where's my cash to pay all this debt? So now I'm just, the interest on my cards are starting to build up. And so I just moved too fast and I was making silly financial decisions.
If you could put your finger on just the biggest item that hurt you, that was like, man, I would have done this differently. Was it contractors? Was it underwriting? I mean, was it something else right there? Just as a learning lesson?
I'd say the construction piece, the getting the construction spot on. The underwriting, well, there weren't many that didn't sell, that sold for, significantly enough under the budget to make, or under the expected ARV to make an impact. But the construction piece, overages of construction, mismanaging contractors, having to fire multiple contractors on the same job. So I've learned a lot of lessons since then. I've had the same guy since 2018. I've been very fortunate there. But, I often say you've got to kiss a few toads before you find a prince, right? Isn't that how the story goes? So, but I'll tell you though, man, as I look back on it, I learned and grew tremendously through that time. So I don't know, I would definitely change it because there were many sleepless nights. The only time I've had that kind of stress, I mean, I had a couple of panic attacks at the time. It got serious, right? My health was jeopardized because of it. I was just taking on too much risk. And I think ego had a play in it. I think that in not listening to your mentors, that was a big one. One of my mentors said, Shaun, keep that job as long as you can. Keep that job as long as you can. And I didn't want to hear it. I had enough doors that the cash flow supported my living expenses and maybe a little bit more. I forget exactly at the time, but I quit my job probably prematurely. And now a turnover or two happen at once. And all of a sudden your little cushion you thought you had isn't there anymore. So there was a little bit of ego play there in that way, not like buying so many doors ego, but not listening to my mentor.
Yeah. Thinking we know better than somebody that's ahead of us in a season. I definitely think that the contracting piece is the hardest piece. And I feel like some people don't quite understand, but if you purchase a property, for new investors, you purchase a property, you do the contracting piece wrong, and you'll probably figure this out sooner or later. You might just have to redo the contracting piece. So you do it twice and it's like super painful. And you're like, man, I just need good contractors.
Can I give you a story on that? A
please.
Recent story?
Yeah, sure.
So one of my borrowers came to me and he took a loan, I don't know, last day of 2022, I think it was. And they came to me in Labor Day of 23 and said, hey, we tried to list this property. Turns out there's a vacant building notice on it. So now we have, in order to get a use and occupancy permit, we have to pull full permits and get full inspections. And in order to do that, well, let me back up. So that's the route the road they started down. And unfortunately, at that first inspection, it was determined that nothing that their previous contractor did was to code. This guy renovated the entire house. They were ready to list this place. Nothing they had done was to code. And he moved so quickly that draw inspections, he was moving fast. We released draw at the end of the rehab. So I wasn't there to collect permit stickers or anything. And this guy got this house done. Nothing was to code. So they had to rehab this place. He had to contact a new contractor. He and his partner fell off. They had a bad relationship. He contacted a new contractor, and the guy came in and said, look, it's going to cost you $30,000 for me to get this place able to pass all of your inspections. It's like, man, I don't have it. So he came to me with the problem, and he and I talked it through, and he went out and did the right thing. He raised money. He lost his tail on this one, no doubt. He definitely lost his money on this, but because he had to rehab the house, because they didn't vet the contractor, the right contractor on the front side, they had to rehab this house. That's a pricey mistake.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't, he got an expensive education. You got to spin it right for him. He got an expensive education, but yeah, no.
You're going to pay for it one way or another. You pay on the front side, you pay on the back side, but you're going to learn. He did. He got an education.
If you only focus on that, how much you're paying for the rehab, sometimes we totally miss the boat, and sometimes you totally miss the important things. I actually think that if you're overpaying a contractor, even if it's, you're not massively overpaying, but if you're just overpaying a little bit, but that contractor has like tons of experience and they can pick things out for you and they can go, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you can really rely on them. I mean, I'd say it's a good investment. Just chalk it off as a good investment, because that person that you're paying cheaper, that you end up have to pay, you have to redo it twice, or they don't pull the permits and they told you to pull the permit, they told you they pulled the permits. It's just a painful experience. So again, thank you for being vulnerable and letting people learn from you a little bit. And you did share there, even though people might not realize, a few tips there on like vacant notices. And when you purchase a property, realizing if it has a vacant notice, and we're talking about Baltimore specific, if it has a vacant notice, you're going to have to pull permits to be able to get a use and occupancy permit, or else either you're not going to be able to rent it out, or you're going to rent it out illegally.
Right. So
you don't want to do that, because that could really end up biting you in the butt. So some of those things people can pick up, but they might not totally realize that, oh man, these are some good tips. So you do want to look to see if the property has a vacant notice, if you're purchasing from a wholesaler or anybody else, just to know, hey, I'm going to have to pull a bunch of permits on there. You can also look, we have this checklist that I call property background that I just really love. And it's basically a checklist of like 10 items, maybe it's like 8, but it goes through like, look at the water bill of a property, see how high it is or low it is, look at what permits have been pulled. And it just goes through these different things. Look if it has a use and occupancy permit. And it's important because it makes sure we're hitting all those quality assurance things, because sometimes we just forget. You're like, oh, you get so excited about the deal. I know I get really excited about the deal. If I don't have a system in place, I'm buying that deal. I'm like, man, I'm going to make so much money on this property. And you go back and the title company might go to close, and title goes, do you know, like 3 days before close, do you know there's a $10,000 water bill on this property? And it's like $1,000 a month. You're like, oh, what? Am I going to have to pay for that? And so that could blow the deal up. But just knowing these things in advance kind of gives you that ammunition to move forward. If you have a process that just helps you hit all the things that you need to hit. And I want to go into kind of your next part of your story. So you started pivoting. You're still active in rentals. I'm a big fan of, if you have a coach or if you have a mentor, make sure they're still kind of active in the game. It just helps them be so much better equipped to help you, instead of somebody that doesn't, or you don't want a financial advisor that doesn't have a good financial portfolio giving you advice, because they don't have the wounds. They don't to show you, hey, I've already done that. You don't want to go down that path.
Right.
But talk to me. You started pivoting. Did you do education first? Did you get into hard money? Which one of those came first?
Yep. So pre-COVID, I was recruited. So I mentioned earlier that I joined a coaching, mentorship, education company years ago that really taught me the business initially, before I found a local mentor. Well, that company later, in a way, recruited me to come coach for them, just over the phone, coaching, scripted coaching phone calls. And I enjoyed it. And then I later got recruited to speak for them. So I was traveling the country speaking and coaching for this company. And then COVID hits. And of course, those live events went away. But I'll tell you, man, what I really enjoyed most about that was I'd be in front of an audience of however big or small it was, and I'd say something, whatever it was, and the guy or gal in the front row, I saw their eyes light up and the pen hit the paper. So whatever I just said, it hit home. It delivered the nugget they might have been looking for that day, right? And I got a lot of personal fulfillment from that, because it is a lonely business. We're on an island. This office is just me here. And so to be able to like pour into somebody and some knowledge that you just got buried back here, and they just realize, oh my gosh, that's the nugget I needed to connect the dot that was missing. That was awesome. That's powerful. And so I really enjoyed that. Then COVID hit, and the pandemic hit, and the live events went away. And around that time, debt was really good, right? 2020, 2021, I refinanced a large portion of my portfolio, 30 some properties I refinanced, secured some really good debt, and cashed out a few six figures. And this is tax-free dollars. And so I decided at that time, I also in 2021 became a father. And so, a lot of my focus and my decision-making was influenced differently now, right? And so, and I also had all that experience that we just got done talking about of getting my butt kicked by making some silly decisions. So now I thought, what do I want to do with this? So I decided to sit down. I called it like a financial IQ or financial quest, right? I went on a quest and I sat down with all the people that I thought were doing well, that were doing different things. And I have a picture of this. I might have shared it with you before, but I have a picture of a whiteboard with all the names of the people I met with and all the topics we talked about. It was really cool. But I mean, at the time, crypto was big, all these big things, right? I was considering lots of different options. And the two people I sat down with that I wanted to emulate the most, that had the similar personality to me, that had the similar bankroll that I desired to have, were private lenders, were hard money lenders. And so I decided with that capital and some other capital that I had that I'd come into from the refi, I could have just, financed some of my own deals and driven down my own cost of capital to do more deals. But I thought at that time, I want to throw a new fishing line in the water. I want to do something different. And what that was, I ultimately decided on building a hard money lending business. And so I've been lending for a few years now. And sometime in 2023, I sat down with a guy, and I've heard this conversation many times. Hey, Shaun, would you coach me or consult or mentor me? Because what you're doing, your formula seems to work, right? Meaning I've built this little boutique collective of businesses that produce some financial and time freedom, and it's replicatable. There's nothing secretive about it, right? And so I'm happy to help folks to connect the dots. I'm basically, with a coach, you're kind of helping people to cut the line, right? Learn from your mistakes. And so last year it hit me. I thought, you know what? I'd been asked that question a number of times. I often said no, because quite honestly, I don't want my reputation at risk because you didn't take action. I walked you to water. You didn't drink. That's on you. I didn't love that. That was part of the reason I was resistant to starting my own coaching, mentorship, mastermind type of a thing. And, but ultimately I decided, you know what, this formula does work, and I'll be happy to share it with some others. And so I started the program last year. I put together a course and a program, and it's allowing me to pour into people, but also not feel that I'm doing my own time a disservice. And so really that's it. So to answer your question, I learned from a coaching program, and there was mentors along the way. Then I started lending, and now I'm lending and coaching. I haven't bought a new rental property in the last few months, but I'm like everybody else. I'm a deal junkie. I'm always itching to buy something, but I'm working on a few big projects inside of my businesses right now. So, outside of just a deal. So, but yeah, that's kind of how that happened.
That progressed. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And in that process where it was like educator or education company, which was Fortune Builders, correct?
That's right.
Which is, a super large company. And then you went over and started to do hard money lending. Was when you joined, or when you were coaching for Fortune Builders for a little bit, did you have a portfolio at that time? Just so I can understand. Okay.
Yeah. I started building the portfolio in 2015, and I started coaching with them in 2018.
Okay. Awesome. And then for investors that want to use hard money, what's the best way or the most successful way that you see investors using hard money? You just kind of just go through like a really short process of like, what's the best way that they can utilize hard money for their success?
Yeah. Easy question. In my opinion, it's this.
Yeah.
Use hard money for as much money as the hard money lender is willing to give you, and then find a private lender, friends, family, and that, to fill in the gap. And that's how you can truly do deals with no money, none of your own money. So what does that mean? So in my opinion, use a hard money lender in the first lien position, and then whatever is required of you additional to that, to their, cash to close and the other money that's going to be required throughout the term of the loan and the deal, raise that from a private lender, friends, family, aunt, uncle, all of that. That allows you to scale infinitely, quite honestly.
And then hard money lender, you're talking about like, you'll loan 8, I try to break it down and not use too many technical words like LTV, but you'll use a hard money lender for like 80% of the purchase price, and then the private lender for like 20% of the purchase price. Is that what you're kind of saying?
You could do that. Yes, that's one breakdown. I'll give you another one, and I'm going to get a little technical because you just said no LTVs, but I'm going to use LTV. So
you can. I mean,
the
it's
audience, loan to value. LTV stands for loan to value. In our business, we'll do around 65 to maybe 70% LTV of ARV. So what does that mean? If the property's ARV is, say, $200,000, it's going to be worth $200,000 when it's done. 65% of that's $130,000. If a borrower buys a property for 100 and it needs 30, I might fund 100% of the deal because it still keeps me under that threshold of 65 LTV. That said, I'm only funding their purchase and their rehab. There are closing costs associated with that. There are interest payments along the way, monthly, that are due. There's insurance premiums that need to be paid. There's grass that needs to be mowed. There's utility bills that need to be paid all along the way from settlement to settlement, whether it's a flip or a refinance. And so you can use a hard money lender for that 130 piece and then a private lender for the balance. Or to your point, a hard money lender says, I'll do 80%, then you find the 20% elsewhere. But utilize hard money for as much as that lender is willing to give you.
And we utilize, why would you utilize hard money instead of a conventional loan or a FHA?
Good question. Speed and ease. That's the answer. Speed and ease. I can digress. I can go real deep on it if you want, but FHA conventional underwriting is going to take 45 days, 30 to 60 days or so. I have funded multiple deals within 24 hours of them even being presented to me. That's fast. No bank in town is going to be able to do that. So there's speed there. Also, ease. We don't require as much underwriting guideline. Our underwriting guidelines are a lot looser than an FDIC insured bank, right? Or any sort of a lender, any sort of an institutional lender. So meaning we still underwrite our borrowers. We definitely vet the heck out of our borrowers, but we're willing to put loans on houses that have trees growing through the roof, and a bank's going to walk you out the door if you walk in with something like that. An FHA loan, if it's not a habitable property, there's no kitchen in the place, it can't be lived in, well, you're going to have to get creative.
Yeah.
But speed and ease is the
answer. It's one of that. If you're doing a big rehab, sometimes those bank options are not options for when people say, hey, why do I got to use hard money? It's like, sometimes you have to use something else because regular banks will not lend on a property that doesn't have a floor, doesn't have flooring, doesn't have, often if it's just down to plywood, it's like, sorry, we're not lending on that. You do conventional in those scenarios, but they do take a really long time, and definitely speed is it's an advantage in investing, right? You got to get an offer out there quick. And sometimes wholesalers and other people, you bring them a conventional pre-approval, that might be like, hey, I'll give it to somebody else because I don't want to deal with your stuff. It might fail inspection, might whatever. So just another tool in your tool belt. I love that. For the OPM, which is other people's money or private lending, if you're lending from a family member, what are people usually giving those family members? Are they getting them terms? Talk to me about like what's in, how do you approach your family member and say, hey, I'm purchasing the property. What does that look like? And like,
sure. So what I have seen my borrowers do, I've seen them do both. Give up equity. Their dad's going to take a portion of the profit when they sell the flip, or give up debt. They're going to pay their aunt 6, 8, 10% interest, right? Whatever that is. As an operator myself, I'm always, I would rather give up debt than equity, right? In what we do in our residential space, right? So I think that, really that's it. So I've seen them get creative in structuring it many different ways. I personally have structured private money in many different ways, but if you want to get technical, I can get as, how do you collateralize it? What docs do you use?
I think that was perfect. You're telling people kind of, hey, 6 to 8, 10%, or you can do, percentage of equity. What percentage of equity do people normally, this is something, and I'm curious. What percentage?
What I have seen from my borrowers is as high as 50-50, right? So, which is pretty high. But the operator brought the deal, and they didn't have to on the net
profit.
Yep, you got it. Yep. And so, or if it's a rental, they're just going to own the property 50-50. The operating agreement is written right down the middle. If one borrower is stronger on paper, meaning they have better credit, they may take the majority ownership of the entity on the operating agreement. So they have 51 or more ownership. but they'll split the cash flow, they'll split the equity, or they'll if they sell it, they'll share, they'll split the profit
50-50.
But
that makes
the reason for that is somebody sourced the deal, but they didn't have the money to fund it. Somebody else didn't know how to source a deal, but they could fund it. So it is kind of fair in that way. But I've seen it less. I've seen it. That's the most I've seen, 50-50, but I've seen it, carved up different ways.
Cool. No, I appreciate you sharing that. As far as, talk to me, you do hard money lending. So what's your company's name? What are those rates? What are those terms? If people are like, hey, I don't have a hard money lender, I'd like to reach out to Shaun.
Sure. Yep. So my hard money lending business is called Monument City Capital, just a nickname for Baltimore, Monument City Capital. You can find us at monumentcitycapital.com. We charge 12% interest in 3 points. It's a 6-month loan. We do offer extensions. We do have some, underwriting guidelines underwriting thresholds that we do require of our borrowers and their deals to qualify. There's some deal killers that we just don't do. But at a high level, our rates and terms, 12% interest, 3 points for 6-month loan with extensions available.
And what are those what would something be that would disqualify a borrower?
Good question. I've been asked to fund new construction recently. I don't want to do that. Partly because my closest mentor was a home builder and he's basically scared me away from doing that. But I also understand that the timelines on those deals are often very long. And I've got some personal friends that build houses that have been hemmed up in big ways due to bureaucracy and that they can't control. And so new construction's not for me. I have done some loans for borrowers that have properties with well and septic on them. I've found them to be sometimes okay, but sometimes they've burned them. I had a buddy who did I've heard of, actually, there's a few that I've recently been told, but one of my borrowers drilled for water 2 or 3 times, and that's an expensive bore each time, never tapping, and finally tapped water the 3rd time. But that can take away the profit on your flip pretty quickly. Septic fields are tanks that need that cave during construction. They passed an inspection prior to acquisition. Something happened along the way. Now they've got to dig up and redo a leach field or whatever it is, and there goes their profit.
And so you're saying, just to be specific and just so everybody understanding, sometimes you might pass on a property that's well and septic just because.
I'll ask the question, then I'll make sure. Sometimes, possibly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, I appreciate it. I just want people to know, hey, it's just a little bit riskier of a deal and ground up construction. Is there anything borrower specific that you would say like, hey, you got 400 credit score. Sorry, it's not going to work out.
Absolutely. We like to see a 700 credit or better. I've gone down as low as the mid 6s, but there's a caveat there. If it's a fix and flip, like I do, anyone with a pulse can sell a property, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're going to fix to rent, that means I've got to look at you like Wells Fargo is going to look at you in 6 months. I need you to be able to refinance and qualify for a refinance loan so that I can get my capital back. And so in those cases, I'm not quite as lenient on credit. I do require capital reserves. Based on our average loan sizes and what I have seen, we like to see that our borrowers can produce $40,000 liquidity. Somebody comes to me and says, Shaun, I've got a screaming deal. It's gonna be my first flip. I'm pumped. I've got 15 grand. Well, congratulations. You found a good deal. You have good money, but it's just not enough, right? Go raise some private money and then come back to me when that number looks like 40. And the reason for 40 is cash to close and reserves to get the first milestone, the first construction draw taken care of. And it also shows that this operator has the capacity to have $40,000 in real cash. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. And if you don't have that, I mean, you might recommend, right? Like, hey, you can still wholesale this deal. You lock it up on their contract, wholesale it. And it's a little bit less risky for the borrower. And a lot of times what people don't understand is the hard money lender like yourself. I mean, they're a team member. They don't want you to fail because if you fail, they fail. I mean, that's right. It is very much. Yes, they're in it for profit, but I mean, again, if it's going to be a win-win, or they don't want to take on somebody that it's going to fail just to make the profit, because ultimately it's going to come back to they're going to have to take the property back and whatnot. So you can look at it as a beneficial relationship. You should look at it as a beneficial relationship as teammate. If they say, hey, this might not be a good deal, that's a good thing. You want people on your team that are going to say, hey, these numbers are pretty thin. Are you sure about this? And I'm sure you probably said that to borrowers before, and it makes them
all the time
pencil out. Let me make sure and make sure your guys are on the same page. Like, are you sure you can rent that? I mean, I've seen people in our groups that will say like, hey, we're renting this property out for like, I'll ask them numbers because I like to hear numbers, and they'll say, hey, $2,300. I'm like, oof, I mean, $2,300 right there. Are you sure? I mean, I know the property manager said that, but a lot of times like, hey, you sure? And you want people to say that. It's not they're trying to knock you off your horse. You just want people to question you to make sure you go back and go, I'm comfortable. I mean, in essence, you just want people to be confident in themselves that, hey, whatever their plan is, they're going to deliver, right?
You're spot on, man. I absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we are an extra set of eyes. And, I find that most hard money lenders have one of two backgrounds typically. They either have some history in the real estate investor operational side, right? Running a fix and flip business, wholesaling, buying rental, whatever they're doing. Or they come from typically a mortgage background. That's what I tend to see. And you want that person as the extra set of eyes looking at your deal. I remember my very first flip. I sat down with a big hard money lender. They're local to the Baltimore Metro, good friends of mine to this day. I sat down with him and he said, I wouldn't do this deal. I was like, man, really? And he said, I'm not going to fund it. I don't think you should do the deal. Well, of course I went ahead and did the deal, but,
so then I just went ahead and did the deal out of spite.
Yeah. So whatever he said, you've got this big, beautiful office and all this money, the hell with what do you know? Yeah. Well, I went ahead and did the deal, but I did end up making a net profit of $21,315. So it worked out. It wasn't a home run, but back then it was a pretty decent hit.
Yeah.
And so it worked. But the fact that he was willing to say, dude, you know what? I don't think you should do this. I'm not going to do it. I don't think you should do it. Okay. Well, that's what you want to hear. It might be deflating, but it tells you that something's off.
It made you go back, and I bet you went back and looked at the numbers again to give you that second pulse or that second. I mean,
right.
And I think this is a good learning lesson for everybody. It's something that I've learned over the years. If you just have somebody that looks over your shoulder, it might not be partners, might be a friend, and you just send them your numbers and just say, hey, I'm thinking about this. This makes sense. Obviously, you want them to have some sort of knowledge about real estate. Sure. But if they're just even if they have no knowledge of real estate, you're going to make sure it doesn't look stupid, at least when you present it to them. I've found that very much. If I'm going to do talk or something else, I got to fine tooth comb my stuff to make sure I don't look stupid. So it makes me go back and really go, am I confident in what I'm saying? So however that looks like a coach, if that looks like a friend, if that looks like one of these Facebook groups, if you're in our group, you're in Shaun's group, you're in an investor network group, you say, hey, I found this deal. What do you guys think of these numbers? I mean, people are going to give you unfiltered, hey, I think you're an idiot. Some of them are kind of raw, but at least you're hearing, what they think. Hey, I think you're an idiot for thinking you're going to get $3,000 in that zip code. Right. And then you go, am I right? And you really go and you really rack your brain and go, I think they're wrong. And that's okay. But I think that just that second look over your shoulder helps. Again, hard money lender, coach, or just random person that's keyboard warrior on Facebook saying, pivoting now into coaching. Mm-hmm. So now you're doing coaching, you still have your portfolio, you're doing hard money lending, which is awesome. And now you're getting in a little bit into coaching, into teaching, into mentoring. Talk to me about what that looks like for your students.
Good question. And actually it kind of circles back to the conversation we're just pivoting from. Recently, one of my students is going to become a borrower. We're funding a loan for him next week. We've underwritten lots of deals together. I have poked holes in all of them. And for that reason, I think he's doing a safe deal. Now, I know that things could still go wrong. But if I think he's doing a safe deal, he's probably a lot better. He's got more confidence in doing that deal than he would have otherwise. That's not tooting my own horn. I just have a decade of experience that he doesn't have. And so I poke holes in it and say, no. Now you got a good one, right? That gives him some confidence to go forward. And so, personality and value alignment is important in coaching, right? I'm not going to be for everybody and everybody's not going to be for me. I'm not trying to sell this to people because I'm trading my time. I'm pouring into people. I'm basically trying to rebuild my business or I'm trying to build their business in the image of mine, right? And so I'm pouring into them. I spend a lot of time on Zoom calls one-on-one with my students. I underwrite their deals. I provide them with all of the tools that I use in my business today, from our contracts and scripts to our calculators and all the tools that I've built out and that I've just procured over the years. Also, these students are doing or are trying to do what I do. If somebody comes to me and wants to take down a self-storage facility, I'm not the guy. And I'll admit that that's not my expertise. You need to go to CRE, a commercial real estate specialist for those things. I stay in my lane. But I don't know if that answers your question or not, but, or do you want to get granular on what the program kind of looks like? I can do that too, if you'd like.
I mean, just briefly on what the program looks like. I mean, you did share like you're underwriting, you're doing some Zoom calls, and just so we can hit it exactly. You're coaching people that are looking for residential housing in the Baltimore area. Could it be over in Florida? I mean,
anywhere.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, my first student was up in Pennsylvania. Most of everything that I teach is universal. It's all this. It's not geographic or market specific. Because these strategies work regardless. When I was coaching for that company we talked of earlier, some of these students, I'd be underwriting their deals in Iowa and Idaho. I've been to Iowa, but never to Idaho, right? So I don't know that area at all, but I can underwrite a deal there because there's a science to running comparables. And there's a science to determining deal analysis and repair estimation. It's very much a science. And so, but what we do with our students, I'm actually in the process of building out a new course, a new training module course. It's going to be in a portal they can log into and access whenever they want. In the meantime, I'm just spending a lot of time on Zoom one-on-one with these students. And we have a shared Google Drive folder where I save all of our calls and our notes. And each week I hold them accountable. We get on a call next week and we ask what was done from the week before's homework. And if the answer is nothing, we're going to go back to that because every week builds on itself. You think we're kind of taking them through an evolution here, meaning business foundations, literally creating a name and some considerations to avoid, to where do I find somebody to design me a logo, to getting their Google Workspace set up and their systems and tools in place, to starting to do some marketing, whether it's direct to seller, inbound or outbound marketing, determining what their budget is for that, what their goals are there. And then we get into repair estimation, deal analysis, dispo, everything, right? We just walk them through the entire thing and I'm holding their hands. And so right now it is I'd call it more of a consulting business. It's one-on-one right now. And it will grow to something different over the next couple of quarters here, meaning once I launch the new portal with the new modules, I'll likely go to a weekly group call and then periodic one-on-ones instead of weekly one-on-ones. But so that'll evolve. But the goal is to help people build a small boutique of real estate investing businesses like I have.
So what you're saying is get in now so people can get one-on-one phone calls with Shaun Magner.
I'll take the plug. Get there. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm saying, David.
No, I love that. And then you already have your hard money lender. You're going to develop trust. So you have that. I mean, it's a pipeline. I love that. We're going to wrap up here shortly. I mean, it's been an hour phone call. I really appreciate everything that you've shared, being super vulnerable. I mean, it's very rare and really a sign of somebody that you want to listen to is when people are vulnerable and they let you know, hey man, I messed up really big here. Everyone has losses. Everyone has loss unless it's your first deal and hey, you got a home run and you have no experience. I mean, you might not have any losses, but if you have experience, especially in Baltimore, you're going to have some sort of loss or some sort of story. And if you don't, then you're definitely not doing a lot of investing or build out that experience. So I do just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for being vulnerable, for helping the audience, for people that are looking for that encouragement to purchase maybe their first property. I will put in the notes down below in the description, all your contact information so people can just reach out to you directly. Anything else that you wanted to share?
No, you just said something there that about being vulnerable. Nobody and being relatable. Everybody likes an underdog story. Nobody likes to hear the story of the guy that got up to bat and just hit home run after home run, right? You like to hear the slumps, and that makes for a good story. It's a compelling story because it's relatable. And so I think that there's no better way than to get on a podcast like yours and just share the truth. I mean, they've not all been wins, and you shouldn't expect when you get into this business or any business that you're only going to have wins. Be prepared. Any savvy investor is going to look at the downside risk before the upside potential, and the same in business in general. So no, man, listen, I really appreciate you having me on. You're giving me the opportunity to hopefully deliver some nuggets to your audience, and anything that I can do to add value to your community, buddy, please don't hesitate.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing. There is a lot of nuggets in there. Shaun, let's keep in touch, brother.
Sounds great, man. Thanks for having me, buddy. I really do appreciate it.
All right, dude. Hey guys, see you on another episode.